welcome to Gabie's Knit Goodies. I am Gabie, and this is a finished object video this week, specifically about the sweater that I'm wearing. It's the Ghost Horses sweater by Caitlin Hunter of Boyland Knitworks, and I will put all the information here as well as down below in the little information box below. All right, so I will show some video of me wearing this sweater, as well as just talk general about it, and then I also want to talk all the details about the yarn amounts, my needle sizes, my gauge, and everything, and how it compares to the pattern. But my initial overall feelings on this sweater is that I absolutely love it. I love the fact that it has these little horses on it, but that they are not like in your face, like cutesy childish color work. And I guess she called it ghost horses because it's not obvious. Some people actually have to point it out that there are horses on here. So, but once they see it, they easily see them. Anyways, so I really like that. I like that it is all over color work. I love the fact that I knit the long sleeve version because it's just something I will wear much more. And having fingering weight yarn in an all over colorwork sweater makes it so it's just the right thickness to wear a lot. So I can layer it and make it warmer, or I can just wear it as is and it's not as warm, it's a little bit lighter. I'll talk a little bit more about the yarn in a minute, but I love the yarn that I knit it out of. It is my own hand-dyed yarn, which, makes it extra special, and it's so soft and next to skin, like soft. I don't even have to wear like a long sleeve shirt under this. So, a little bit about the sweater. It is a top-down yoked sweater. And you start with the ribbing here at the neck, and you go into your color work, and it's all over color work, like I said, but it's only 2-stranded color work. You never bring in a third strand. You do your increases in the yoke, then you split for your sleeves and knit the rest of your body. And then you put those stitches back on your needles and pick up stitches under the arm, and you knit the rest of your sleeve. Now the pattern and the sample in her pattern, let me take it back. The sample in her pattern has a cropped sleeve, not the full long sleeves, but the pattern does come with instructions for long sleeves as well as the cropped sleeves. The one thing you need to be careful of is your yardage. I think the yardage is spoken for the cropped sleeves, I believe. And yes, the mid-length sleeves, which are like just above the elbow, and her cropped version. So if you're going to knit a longer sleeves, then you just make sure you have enough yarn. Okay. What else should I say about this before I get into all the details? I don't know. I love this sweater. And I also love that I love Caitlin Hunter's style and her colors and her color work and her patterns. I love just about everything she does. However, like the fitted version that is in this pattern, it recommends like a 1 to 3 inch positive ease. Is not my style. And if I had made it fitted, I just wouldn't wear it very much based on my other sweaters that I have knit. I wear my bigger ones more because they're comfy and cozy and they don't hug my belly, so I like that. So I love the fact that knitting provides you the ability to take someone else's style, the designer's style and vision, and mesh it with your own style and create your own garment that's, both of your visions kind of mesh together. So I knit her pattern straightforward. I didn't actually make any modifications other than my size choice. So I knit a much larger size than what the pattern would recommend. And I absolutely love the result of it. So, and it's just cool that knitting provides that opportunity to do that. Like I have a friend who much prefers fitted garments, and so she could do the reverse and just knit, modify a pattern to fit her style and her fitted garment style versus the other way around. So knitting is a cool craft. Okay, let me go over all the details. I will put the details up on the screen, and I will also put the centimeters up on the screen, but I'll probably just talk in inches. I am from the eastern side of the USA, and I typically work in inches, even though the metric system does make more sense. I like base 10, but okay. So start with the yarn. In her sample, she used spin cycle yarn. Wilder, it is 100% merino wool, 200 yards per 50 grams. She used a light gray and a one called Dirty Little Secret. They're both the same, 100% wool, merino wool, I think, and 200 yards per 50 grams. So I used my own hand-dyed yarn, Gabie's Knit Goodies yarn, in colorways Coffee with Cream and Mexican Hot Chocolate. So these are my two yarns I used together for this sweater. And this is 463 yards per 100 grams. So equivalent, she has 400 yards per 100 grams, and these are 463 yards per 100 grams. So that does make these slightly thinner than the yarn that she used in the original pattern. But not a whole lot. This is super soft. It is 75% merino and 25% nylon. And I used 4 total, though I didn't use all of them. So I have 2 of these and I had 2 of these. So Coffee with Cream and Mexican Hot Chocolate. I used, the same needle size that she used. So she had a US 2 for the neckline and a US 4 for the main body. So the 2 was for all of the ribbing, the neckline, the sleeve, and the hem. And then the 4 was for the rest of the color sweater. Like I said, I used the same needle sizes. My gauge was slightly different, however. Now, I think my gauge could easily match hers if I were to wet block this and just stretch it just a tiny bit. But I really like the feel of it, and so I just did a nice steam blocking, and my color work was not puckering or anything. So it really didn't need to be like wet blocked and pinned out. So I just steam blocked it. Yeah. And I like how it turned out. At some point in time, I might wet block it, but only if it gets dirty, because it didn't need to be flattened out. So I steamed it, and it made any little bit of bumps I had going on in the yoke for the color work smooth out really well, and it fits just really well now. So my gauge is 28 stitches and 30 rows per 4 inches, and her gauge in the pattern is 24 stitches and 32 rows or rounds per 4 inches.
So after I rewatched my video, I realized that the gauge I gave was for the yoke here, and I hadn't checked the body of the sweater. And I do actually get about 24 stitches per 4 inches for the body, which does match the pattern. So I think that I knit this yoke part of the sweater a bit tighter than I did the body of it. So that's something to keep in mind. The yoke might be a little more difficult to keep loose, or it just might end up a little tighter than the body, even though it's all over color work. So yeah, it worked out fine for me. It doesn't cause me any problems, but my gauge is a little bit tighter up here than it is in the base of it, which makes sense for the fact that the body measurement is about the same size as it's supposed to be, but my gauge up here is a little bit smaller. So in the body, I did get the 24 inches per 4 inches, 24 stitches per 4 inches for the gauge. So just wanted to add that in.
So keep that in mind if you, whatever yarn you use, and the way you block it does make a difference in your gauge, and your post-blocked gauge is what you need to go off of for your measurement. So if you are knitting tighter than her, go up a needle size to try to match her gauge would be ideal. Or if you're doing like me and knitting an oversized garment, you have a little more wiggle room than you would if you're trying to make a fitted garment. If you're trying to make it fitted, like those 1 to 3 inches of positive ease that she recommends in the pattern, you really want to get your gauge kind of spot on to match the patterns so that you know how it's going to fit in the end, because you just don't have the wiggle room you do when you're making it oversized. Okay. Yardage. So I ended up knitting, actually we'll go back to size. My bust measurement is like 33, 34 inches, so I should have knit, according to the pattern, a size 2, which would have given me, let's see, a garment with like a 36 inches at the bust, so about 2 inches of positive ease, so it'd be a fitted garment, and the suggested positive ease 1 to 4 inches. So it would be right there within that. But I chose a much larger sweater because I wanted that boxy, cozy fit. And I knit size 5. So according to the pattern, I would have knit a size 2 to make the fitted garment. I knit a size 5, so a good bit bigger. And that could have given me a size 48 inches, which would give me a 14 inches positive ease around the bust. So I ended up with 46 inches. So it's pretty close. So I have about 12 inches of positive ease around the chest, which I absolutely love. So it worked out really well. So yardage for a size 5 in the mid-length sleeves, the just above the elbow length sleeves, in the crop version like the sample, it's about 1,600 yards suggested in the pattern, just under 800 for color 1 and just over 800 for color 2. So that's 1,600 yards. I ended up using 1,667 yards, but I made it with the long sleeves. So it sounds like she does have some wiggle room in her yardage, because this is, if I had knit it with cropped, it would have been here. So I have all of this extra yarn on both sides here that I knit. That would have been more than her, cropped sleeve version. So my yardage was almost exactly what her recommended yardage was, only I knit long sleeves. So she has a little bit of wiggle room in there. All right. What else? So I'll tell you my dimensions for my personal garment. Like I said, the bust circumference is 46 inches, and the size 5 pattern actually says it should be 48 inches, I think. So I'm not too far off there from that, even though my gauge is a little bit tighter than hers. My neck circumference here is 21 inches, and I cast on that 144 stitches for the size 5. My sleeve length, it gives me these lovely kind of balloony sleeves, and then it cinches down, but it's not tight on my wrist. I love how the sleeves worked out, because it doesn't fall over my hand because the cuff, but the cuff is not tight, so it's very, very comfy. But anyways, from cuff up to here, along my arm here, I knit down to 28 inches here. The sleeve circumference up here is about 14 inches. So I have plenty of extra room, which I wanted. That enables me to layer it too if it is cooler. Especially if you make, I feel like if you make it a little bit boxy and a little bit cropped. By cropped, it's definitely below my belly button, but it doesn't hang low over my hips. So if it's windy at all, it's definitely cooler. So it's nice to be able to layer things under it if it's cooler outside. Let's see. Sleeve circumference, I said that. Oh, here we go. From the neck to the bottom front hem, the bottom of the front hem of the garment, I knit 16.5 inches. So that's a little bit on the cropped side, I say. I am kind of short-waisted, so that comes a couple inches below my belly button. So definitely just past my my pants, the waistband of my pants. It comes below that, which is nice. It ended up being 9 inches from the neckline here to where I split for the sleeves. So that was 9 inches, which gives me plenty of room, like I said before, under my arms here to wear a long sleeve shirt under it if I wanted to. And from the sleeve separation down to the bottom of my hem is 8 inches. Let's see. Oh, and this circumference here, right before I split for the sleeves, is 52 inches. So I have plenty of room to move about. And the yarn is plenty stretchy, so it definitely doesn't constrain me at all. So I think those are all of the details. Please feel free to ask me anything you want about this garment and how I knit it or what I feel about it. One question you might ask is, would I recommend this pattern? And I absolutely would. I would recommend it if you like color work. I would not say it's a beginner's pattern. The garment construction is super simple. It's just the top-down yoked sweater and it's seamless. So that's really easy. However, it is all over color work. So I would rate it probably more of an intermediate pattern because of that. It takes a little endurance to do that, I think. But it is fun, and I think color work, you get excited to move on to the next pattern, and so that gets fun. You know, the base here is like the same repeating pattern, so that's not quite as exciting. And then you do that on the sleeves too. And I kept thinking I was doing it right on one sleeve, and then it's just a couple of little patterns that repeat, but I would get them all out of order, and I had trouble with one of these sleeves. I think I was doing too much while knitting it, so I wasn't thinking enough. Probably social knitting. Maybe not the best social knitting. I mean, it's not super complicated, but I think that actually made it easier to mess up on the sleeves. Whereas like the horses, you really had to pay attention to. That's the other thing I would say about it being like intermediate, is the color work here for the horses is not like memorizable. It's hard to, it's not super intuitive. You really had to pay attention to that section, and you wanted to get that right because that's the horses. Whereas the rest of the color work is very intuitive and easy to memorize. Let's see. So I think that's about all in terms of the details of it. I did have another question that I was going to answer in this video about color work and knitting an all-over color work sweater. Grace, who's Gracefully Unraveled on Instagram and here on YouTube, she does knitting and crochet. She makes the cutest little crochet animals. She asked me how I keep my hands from cramping when I do stranded colorwork knitting. So I thought I would share how I do it. And I hold one strand in my left hand and one in my right. And so I am throwing with one and picking with the other. And that works pretty well for me. I can go back and forth between those very easy. And this only has 2 colors, so that works really well for that. Let's see, in terms of hand cramping, part of that for me is the yarn. If I work with like a stiff yarn like cotton, my hand will cramp much quicker. Or linen, or anything that has a fiber in it that doesn't have a lot of elasticity. Something like this that's merino wool, it has a lot of give to it, and so that helps prevent my hands from cramping up. Acrylic yarn will do that to my hands too a lot of times because I don't think it has quite the same elasticity that wool does. So the yarn choice makes a big difference for me for whether my hands cramp. Another one is just taking breaks. Taking breaks and stretching out my fingers, stretching out my arms, because sometimes I'll get like up in my arms, like my right here will get a little bit sore if I knit a whole bunch. And so taking the time to stretch out my arms and my hands, keep the blood moving, and just breaking up that repetitive motion helps a lot. There are a lot of different ways to do colorwork knitting. You could hold both in your left hand or both in your right. There are even tools that you can put on your finger that can help you keep the yarns like separate. I've never been very good at doing that with tension. Like I have a hard time keeping the tension right when I'm have both on the same hand. So that's never worked really all that well for me. Another thing you can search is ergonomic knitting.
I did a little bit of research, and here are some tips for how to overcome pain when you're knitting. And indeed, knitting can cause hand pain. In fact, the small repetitive motions can fatigue the hands and wrists, and too much repetitive motion can cause permanent damage, called repetitive strain injury. So carpal tunnel, which you've probably heard of, I think a lot of, sometimes you get it from too much typing, or tennis players get carpal tunnel, is that's one of the many types of repetitive strain injury. So we of course don't want that because we want to be able to knit. So I have some tips here. Each time you sit down to knit, there are several important things you'll want to take note of first. So posture is number 1. So when your mom tells you to sit up straight, shoulders back and relaxed, it helps in knitting too. Your shoulders should be, so sit up straight, lean back into the chair comfortably without slouching or bending your neck forward too far. So we don't want to hunch over. And your shoulders should be relaxed with your elbows at your sides. If your chair has armrests and they're too far apart, then that's not good. And if they're too high and it causes you to raise your shoulders, then that's also bad too. A few things you can get to help your knitting, such as an ergonomic seat cushion or compression gloves. I had never really thought about doing that before, but you can get compression gloves that are fingerless, or just the tips are fingerless, so that you can have that extra support on your hands. And use circular knitting needles as opposed to straight knitting needles, even when working just back and forth. So with larger projects, the fabric can get heavy as it increases in length. The weight of the project can add to the strain on your hands and wrists, pulling down as you're knitting. If you're using straight needles, the weight of your project is hanging from the shafts of the needles. So this causes more weight on your hands because it's hanging here as opposed to down into your lap. So circular needles, the majority of the project is hanging from the flexible cable, which allows the project to rest in your lap without weighing on your hands. Now, I actually have a pair of, so you can also get supposedly ergonomic knitting needles. There are square-shaped knitting needles that are supposed to be slightly better to grasp. I've never tried those before. It sounds a little awkward. But then there's also other kinds that are supposedly ergonomic. I have a pair of these that I was talking about a few minutes ago. They are the ones with the funky tip on them. Like they go in and then they kind of go out like a little bulb there. And they're very lightweight because they're plastic and not metal. I like them for regular like stockinette stitch or purling or knitting stitch. And even some like twisted stitches or like a 1x1 type cable, that type of thing they're fine with. But a lot of like lace work or cable work, I like pointier needles for that. And if you've ever heard of Annie and Carlos, I think that's their names. They're on YouTube and they do a lot of knitting, and I think they do a lot of like Fair Isle knitting, and I think they use these knitting needles, and like I said, they're on YouTube as well as I think they might have books and stuff. They do some knitting patterns, I believe. Let's see. And then there's like best practices in terms of like your knitting hand positions as well. So when you hold your knitting needles, it's important to make sure you don't grasp them too tightly. A tight grip tightens your hands as well, which can contribute to hand pain and fatigue. You want to use a light, gentle grasp to hold your needles. There we go. And make your stitches with small, delicate motions. And ideally, you want to use as little motion as possible to form your stitches. So I think that continental knitting is supposed to be a little bit better because you have a smaller motion when you're picking as opposed to the English style when you're throwing. So supposedly that should be better. One thing I do that I think helps is change the way I knit, and I know that can affect your gauge as well, so you have to keep that in mind, and it depends on the project. Like this knitting project that's really long, and it's just a blanket. Sorry about that. So this knitting project, the habitation throw, is a really long blanket, and it's somewhat of a loose knit, and the gauge doesn't really matter that much on it. So if one row is a little bit tighter than the other, or a section of the row is a little bit tighter, it all kind of evens out with the big blanket. So in this type of project where I'm knitting a lot, and it's just the knit stitch over and over and over again, and the gauge is not that important, then I'll change my knitting style. Like I will go between throwing and continental, and I think changing it up means it's not as repetitive because you're changing your motion a bit. I've even done Portuguese purling before, which is interesting. You hold the yarn like around your neck and you purl. Portuguese purling is quite easy. Yeah, I think continental purling is fairly easy too. I think English style purling is more difficult. So, let's see. So there's also the yarn you use, how stiff it is, as well as the type of knitting you're doing. Some types of knitting are harder on your hands than others. So if you have a very tight gauge, that's going to be more difficult on your hands. If you have a lot of cable work, that's probably going to also be more difficult on your hands than stockinette stitch or something like that. So in addition to this information, if you would like to read more, there is an entire book titled Knitting Comfortably, The Ergonomics of Hand Knitting by Carson Demers, Demers.
This book, I'll read his little blurb. This book will help you understand the ergonomics of knitting so you can improve your safety, efficiency, and productivity in knitting. You'll learn to identify ergonomic risks that contribute to injury and reduce knitting efficiency. Throughout the book, you'll be provided with activities and guidance to improve your knitting ergonomics so you can knit more confidently and comfortably. Through the instruction in stretches, exercise, and self-care, you'll also learn how to manage the discomfort common to knitters before it becomes an injury, and how to recognize when it's time to seek help from a healthcare professional. And I think I mentioned this earlier. This is the same guy that was on Fruity Knitting a while back. I don't know which episode it was. It was a few years ago. But he talks there about his book and some helpful advice and tips. And a lot of it is what I've already gone over in terms of posture, where your elbows are placed. He shows some of those square needles on his interview as well. So anyways, I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you guys have issues with that crampiness in your arms or elbows or shoulders or hands, and what you do to prevent it or to help it heal. Yeah, anyways, I hope you found this useful.
A number of years ago, my shoulder ended up causing me trouble, and I think it was actually cotton yarn. I was working with too small of too tight of a gauge for the cotton stiff yarn that I was using, and it just put too much strain on my arms. So anyways, let me know if you knit the Caitlin Hunter Boyland Knitworks Ghost Horses sweater, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.